Good morning, Cathy. How
Hello,
are you?
everyone. I'm great, and I'm so glad to be here. And I look forward to everybody's interesting questions about conversation design.
Awesome. Before we get started with their interesting questions, which I know there's many people, we had a tremendous response for this webinar. It was more than we've seen. So there's a lot of interest in this area and also in you, Cathy. So Cathy wrote this book, Designing Voice User Interfaces. It's at from O'Reilly Media, and you can get it at your local multi-billion-dollar Amazon.com website
Or Barnes and Noble.
or Barnes and Noble or wherever, but it's an excellent read, and thank you. She also spoke at our UX night about a month and a half ago, and that was exceptional. So I would like to get everybody familiar with your work at Google and what it is that you do every single day. Can you tell us a little bit about your work, Cathy? And I'm going to turn off my video to focus on you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, thanks for the intro. So my role at Google is head of conversation design outreach. What does that mean? That means I spend a lot of my time talking to folks, both within Google and outside of Google, about what is conversation design, trying to bring awareness that it's a thing. Just like material design is a design discipline to help with visual design, conversation design is also a design discipline for designing any type of conversational system, whether that's through voice, like on the Google Home, whether it's on your phone, whether it's on like something like a voice forward screen, like the Google Home Hub. All these different things are basically a conversation between you and the machine. And of course, the big point we try to bring across is we're leveraging the way that humans already know how to talk in a way that will allow them to more easily communicate with computers. I mean, why not take advantage of that built-in UI that we all have? And the point of conversation design and why we're trying to bring this awareness is because a lot of times we see companies say, hey, I want to get in that space. I want to build something on the Google Home or whatever. And so they hire a couple developers, maybe throw in some marketing, and they're off to the races. And what we want to say is, just like when you're trying to design a good website, you want to hire somebody with that skill set who knows about design. And so a conversation designer knows the intricacies, not just of how humans communicate, but how to apply those principles within the technical constraints that we live in. And so we want to bring broadly, we don't want just people at Google to be doing this, right? We want anyone who wants to build one of these things to be enabled and empowered to use the right design principles in order to do that. And I'll just make a quick plug for our conversation design guidelines are available on actions.google.com/design. Lots of great principles there. But yeah, I've been doing this kind of work, as Andi said, for quite a while. And I'm really excited about where, I worked on IVRs on phone systems for many, many years, and I learned a lot of stuff, but I got kind of jaded and I thought, why am I doing this? This is just keeping people away from talking to humans. And now I feel like we're in this second era of voice where it's taken on this whole new use. It's more family oriented. It's a way to get away from your screen. It has a lot of great use cases, and we're just at the beginning. So that's about it.
Fantastic. And before we jump into all the technical questions about, car interfaces and all of that, let's talk a little bit about how somebody becomes a is it conversational design, conversation design?
We say conversation design, but
Okay. It's so, like with grammar, it's like, I want to say conversation design because it looks prettier,
yeah,
but
I
then
will
it's
recognize
all,
either utterance.
yeah, but it just looks like it makes more sense with conversational, but that's visual. But what is the career path for a voice UX designer?
We get that question a lot. And honestly, there's no one true path. It's not like you can go out and major in conversation design per se, at least at most schools. But a lot of people tend to have partly a background in humanities, such as psychology, sociology, communications, something to that degree. But you also you need a healthy curiosity and understanding of how humans sort of communicate with each other, not just sort of speaking, but body language, all that kind of stuff. And then you also just have to be comfortable with some of the technical expertise as well. That doesn't mean you have to be a computer science major. You don't have to be a programmer, but you have to be the kind of designer, just like with other design disciplines, where you can't just say, here's my design and throw it over the fence and expect it just to be magically built. You have to take into consideration what things are hard to build, what things maybe the technology can't do right now. So really it's those two skill sets rather than maybe a particular major. And mostly I encourage people who are interested in this space to play around with it, to think of an idea or maybe an experience you had with a voice system that was bad. Why was it bad? Can you make it better? Write sample dialogues. You don't have to be a programmer to sort of play around with these ideas. So those are some of the things that can help.
Somebody did ask about writing dialogues, and what are some of the things that we can do better to create a more natural sounding dialogue?
I'm glad somebody asked that. That's one of the things we talk about almost the most is just like for visual design, there's mocks. For the conversation world and the voice world, there are sample dialogues. And for anyone who's not familiar with those, a sample dialogue is just a potential pathway between your user and your system. It's like a movie script. It's just a back and forth, like user says this, assistant says this, user says this. And you literally are writing it down, whether it's on a piece of paper or in a Google Doc or using a movie script program. The great thing about sample dialogues, there's a lot of great things. One great thing about it is it's low cost. Anyone can write these down. You don't have to program. It doesn't take a huge amount of time. But what it does is it allows you to very quickly see where some of the problems are. For example, if you just went off and programmed a system, one of the things people commonly find is that every single response starts with the word okay, 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 okay. And when you listen to it in a row, it sounds unnatural and weird. If you had written it out as a sample dialogue first, you wouldn't have put okay in front of every single prompt. So it's creating these, what we call prompts, what the system says, in isolation that often causes problems because you don't see how they all stack up with each other. When we speak as humans, we're always interjecting these little things like, if I'm going to ask you 10 questions, I'll probably say, I'm going to ask you 10 questions. First, we call that landmarking. Like I'm letting you know, this is the first question. Halfway through, I might say, okay, we're about halfway done. And then I might finally say, last question. These are the kinds of things that often get left out when we're not thinking about the conversation as a whole. And sample dialogues bring these things out and make you really think very carefully about how it's going to sound and what you're going to need to be able to do to build these things.
Fantastic. Okay, we have a lot of questions about the automotive industry, and of course it's important because like safety and navigation and all that. Where do you see voice user interfaces and where do you see voice user interfaces in the automotive industry going?
Well, what I hope is, and I'm speaking on just behalf of myself here, I'm not talking about anything particular that Google's doing, but for me, in the car is one of the places I want voice the most, and I'm unsatisfied with the current situation. I want to be able to easily switch between a podcast or music or browse my podcasts or, that kind of stuff. Because of course I'm focused on driving. I can't look at my phone and try and figure out what to do. So I think we're going to see more and more of those interfaces. It's challenging for a number of reasons. One, the acoustic environment. It's noisy in the car, especially when you're on the freeway. So it's harder to get accurate speech recognition, but that's really improving quite a bit. Another challenge is if you try to build it into the car's hardware, as many people know, hardware is slower than software. So if you build it into the car, it's going to take a lot longer. It's going to be behind more quickly because you can't just update the car. So we're going more and more, I think, to these software solutions, or maybe you'll have it in your phone and you'll plug your phone into your dashboard and that's where the interactions will take place. So it's microphone technology that's improving, and also just being able to integrate more easily with different cars and not having everything stuck to one particular model or something like that. But it's certainly one of the absolute best cases. One thing to keep in mind, of course, is sometimes people think, oh, it's the hands-free is the problem, and as long as everything is hands-free, we're good to go. But in fact, we also have to think about your cognitive load, how much you can pay attention is even less when you're driving. It's not just the fact you can listen. Think about when you have a passenger, you're having a conversation with a passenger and you're driving. If you have a tricky thing to navigate, your passenger will probably stop talking because they recognize that you really need to focus here. A voice system can't yet do that. And so we have to take into account, make your prompts clear and crisp and don't try to overwhelm the user. Even if it's voice only, it could still be too much. So you have to think about that as well.
Great. Okay, I keep pressing unmute, so it's like a small little delay. What is the best use case of a voice user interface in a car?
or a good use case?
Again, for me, it's media. It's like when I'm driving, my commute is long. I want to be distracted. not too distracted, but I want something to keep me company. And so I'm changing between songs and audiobooks and podcasts. And right now there's no easy way to navigate that. I really want to be able to say, just play the book I'm listening to. What's the latest episode of This American Life? Have I seen it already or listened to it already? Then I don't want to listen to it. What else do I have? To be able to kind of do that type of navigation and manipulation of media, I think would be, for like the short-term future, is very doable and would be really, really powerful for people.
Fantastic. And we talk about a little bit about, well, some people are asking questions about testing voice user interfaces. Let's talk a little bit about the design process. So what do you use to prototype and then also to test voice user interfaces?
That is, that's a really good question, because I think one of the difficulties that I've seen since day one, and then, when I started in this space, is that prototyping tools and development tools are very, very difficult. And there are some tools out there, but I don't know that there's one best tool that can help you with all of the prototyping pieces. Certainly, as far as just in general, what should the tools have? I mean, first of all, there's like the sample dialogue portion, which again, you don't have to have a special tool for that. You can do that in any kind of documentation, even just writing it down. Then you've got to get into the flows, and there's a lot of different flow charting software out there that allows you to sort of, more crystallize the structure of how things are going to go. Obviously, you wouldn't write a flow chart for the complete assistant, but when you pick a particular aspect, like making an appointment, that would have a flow that could show you like, oh, what happens if you can't talk to the back end, you can't get their calendar? What happens if they say an invalid date? And you could call out all those different things that are important. And then, of course, you do need a tool to be able to actually bring that to life. And at the moment, as far as like design only, no programming, I don't know that there's really, there's some tools out there. I can't really, being from Google, I can't really say, a third party particular, but I think there's a lot of room in this space. I think there are some companies that are coming out with some cool ideas, and I want to see more of that. And I think that's going to be coming out now to empower more and more people who aren't programmers to get out there and actually play around with this stuff.
Great. I know Adobe XD just launched a voice prototyping software, which also integrates with Alexa, and I'm curious to see how that extends the field of voice user interfaces.
For
but
sure.
Also, what about testing? We talk a little bit, you talk about prototyping and using a lot of flow diagrams. How do you test?
So there's different aspects of the testing, and it's interesting because a lot of times when I'm working with developers and they're doing their testing, they're testing rightly so for things like where does it break? Can you get through the whole flow and things like that, which of course is very important. But if you also need to be thinking about the design thing. So it's not just could I get from A to Z, it's what happened when I said something, what we call a no match. I said something that an unexpected user response, something we didn't build a response to. What happens to the user? Are they sort of left hanging, or are they gently brought back on track? So testing, the error cases where people say something unexpected or they don't speak. Also testing the fact that people say the same thing in a huge number of ways. This is one of the reasons that voice can be trickier to design for than, say, a more traditional graphical user interface. Because when it's like a mobile app and they tap a button, you know what they tapped. With voice and natural language, it's a little bit more of an educated guess. I mean, think about if I just want to set an alarm for 8 a.m., there's 50 different ways I can say that. I could say set an alarm for 8 a.m., set a timer for tomorrow morning. Timer, I didn't even say alarm, right? But a human wouldn't say, I don't understand because I didn't use the word alarm. A human knows, oh, she meant alarm. So you have to really spend a lot of time testing with real user input and checking your logs and seeing what did someone say that we really should have caught. They just said it in a way that we didn't expect, and do a lot of that iteration to really make sure you understand what users are really going to be saying.
I'm sorry, I don't understand. Can you repeat that question? No, 1 second. Let's talk a little bit about accessibility. What are some accessibility friendly tips that you would have to keep in mind while designing a voice user interface?
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things I really like about voice is for people who do have things like visual impairments and physical impairments, voice can be a great method to get control and independence with certain things. So a few things to keep in mind, always put the really most important information up front. So for example, if I say, hey, Google, is my flight on time? Start with the answer to the question. Say yes or no, like right up front. Or like if I say, what's the temperature outside? Tell me the temperature. You can then add some more information like, yes, your flight's leaving on time at 1 p.m. or it's 75 degrees and it's going to rain tomorrow. But put the really most important stuff up front. Another thing is that it's nice to allow people to control the speed of the output because I know some people with visual impairments who speed things up in just a crazy amount to get things to get the information faster. So that's useful. But another thing is just remember that not everybody's going to have a screen, and you can't just always rely on like, oh, I'm going to send that to your phone. Like, for example, if they ask a question and we have a big list of information that we need to give to the user, sometimes we'll just say, okay, check out your phone, I put it all there. Not everyone's going to be able to do that. So you have to allow another method to get that same information, which to someone who maybe would prefer their phone, maybe they don't want to do it with voice only because it would be more painful. But for somebody, voice is their only channel, then you need to empower them to still be able to get that information.
And somebody talks a little bit about actions. Can you explain what actions are, and then we'll go into some questions about that.
So actions on Google are ways that third parties can create experiences for the Google Assistant. So you might say something like, hey, Google, talk to Starbucks. And that's what we call an action, where you go off to the Starbucks action and it can order your favorite drink or whatever you need. And so anyone out there, it's an open system, anyone out there can design and create these actions. You can use our tool called Dialogflow to do so. You could submit it, it gets reviewed, and then you can put it out there to the world.
Great. And another question about actions is, how should a brand manage and promote multiple actions? And what is the proper strategy to divide voice interactions into multiple actions?
I hadn't thought about that before, because mostly when I think about a particular brand, I usually think that they have a particular action, and then within the action you might do different things. So let's say you're a laundry detergent and you say, talk to a laundry detergent company, and it might say, hey, okay, great, would you like to play a fun game? Would you like to know where you can buy it? And then it could go into the different aspects. So I don't know if that person can say anything more about what they had in mind, like an example of why a brand, for example, would want to have separate actions.
Charlotte, are you there? Charlotte asked the question, so maybe she'll type it into the, yeah, she's here. So did you want to elaborate on your question? Hello. Interactive. While that's happening, I'll look at some more questions. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so here we have, I think, yeah, I will let you know when we upload it to YouTube. I'll definitely send you guys an email and let you all know. I think it's kind of interesting. Some people ask about security features and voice user interfaces. How do you protect people's information that comes in through voice UIs?
I think that is really important to think about. And I know I work at this big company, Google, but to me, privacy is very important. I definitely speak to people who say, I would never have a smart speaker in my house because it's always listening to me. I remind them that your phone is actually listening to you even more. But the things we need to do, and the things that Google does, and someone who's building one of these needs to do is, first of all, just for anyone it's not clear for, something like the Google Home is listening for what we call the hot word, saying, hey, Google, all the time. It's true. But that is done at the local level. So when I'm just having a conversation and I don't say the hot word, nothing is going to the internet. Nothing's going to the cloud. Nothing is going to Google. Nothing is even stored on your local device. Like, as soon as it realizes you didn't say the hot word, that audio is gone. It doesn't save that. Now, when it does think it hears the hot word, then it does start streaming that information to the cloud to figure out, what is that person saying? We do anonymize that information. We also don't store the audio. Also, you can look on your phone at your Google app, Home app, and you can see anytime it thinks it heard the hot word, it will show you that, and it will show you whatever it recorded and sent off. And you can delete those, and they're deleted permanently. So it's really important to be transparent with your users. Like, what are you actually doing? What are you actually storing? What is actually going to the cloud? And let them control it as well, so that they can take care of it and delete it if they're not comfortable with that. So yeah, it's really important for us to try and keep the user's trust and make sure they understand what is happening. Now, that being said, perception is more important than reality, right? So I think we'll probably, not me, Google, but the world at large, I would like to think we'll move to a model where maybe it's all done locally as far as the speech recognition processing and the natural language understanding. Maybe that could all be done on your local device. And it's not until the question is actually determined, like, I want to know, what's the tallest mountain in the world, then that bit of information would go off to the cloud. So I think we'll probably get to more solutions like that in the future, but privacy and transparency is crucial.
I love the idea of it being recorded locally on your machine before like sending off into, where you don't have it's just about giving us control over our information and what it is that we want to share with people. Now, Charlotte followed up about the actions and she says, if a brand has different teams developing multiple voice actions, each focusing on different aspects of the brand, how do we have a holistic strategy to deal with this? Like premium versus free version, an action to control a vehicle. And if you want to think about it also, we can come back.
Okay. I think so. I'll say right up front that is a huge challenge. I mean, it's already challenging enough to educate your users on how to access your experience, because they have to remember, talk to a car company or whatever. So forcing them to say different things to get to different pieces, I think is very, very challenging, unless it's like such a natural command or thing to say that they just do it naturally. So I don't think there is a absolutely fabulous solution to that, except in the way that you communicate to your customers. Like, let's say it's your premium users for your music system. You have to get across to them what it is they can do with your action, and make sure that the way they invoke that action is a way that they would naturally express that desire, so that they will get to the right place more naturally. Because trying to teach them to remember certain phrases is never going to work. So you want to build on this sort of natural discoverability. I'll give you an example of that. On my Samsung phone, one day I was taking a picture of somebody and I said, smile. And guess what? It took a picture. I didn't even know that feature existed. But that was this natural discoverability, where people often say that when they take pictures. And look, now I've learned it and now I use it all the time. So you want to try and build in, how would somebody naturally ask for this kind of thing, and make sure that's how they would get to that experience.
Do you often see people changing the names of the voice user interface? Like for example, if I say, I'm afraid to say it, hey, SIRI, I'll have both my phone and my computer responding at the same time. How do we avoid something like that?
Yeah, this device arbitration, we call it, is definitely, it's getting better, but it's still, it needs work. You should see in our office at work, we've got so many devices and they're all like lighting up. So eventually what'll happen is it'll get a lot smarter about knowing, like, by the context in which you are. So are you in front of your phone? Are you in your car? Are you looking at your computer? Figuring out which device should be the right one to respond. It's also about what type of information you're asking. If I say, can you play that YouTube video of cute cats? It's not my Google Home who's going to need to respond to that, right? It's going to be my smart screen or my TV. So we are definitely we again, meaning the world at large, is definitely going to have to be getting better at understanding context and figuring out which surface should be responding to this request.
Yeah, I feel like context is everything for voice user experience. Yeah. We had a follow-up question about but I'm not sure that you can answer it, but Liz wants to know if Google has a monetization strategy for actions, and will they be cataloged in an action store? Interesting question. I don't know if you're able to answer that. But
yeah, I'm afraid I will have to defer that question. I don't actually know quite enough about that subject to feel like I could speak. Like, I don't want to say something that's like not quite right. So
okay. Yeah. So just stay tuned, Liz. I'm sure your question will be answered at some point, but Cathy doesn't isn't able to answer that right now. Okay, so, and we have another question about what are areas that you see Google Assistant has an advantage over other voice user interfaces such as Amazon, Alexa, and Siri?
I think one of the nice things, I guess I'll have two answers to that. One is that, Google was formed as a search company. So we happen to have a big knowledge graph where we have a lot of that information to hand. So if it's asking a question about information, we've already got a lot of that infrastructure built and we can get access to those types of queries. Another part is if you're in the Google ecosystem. For example, I use Gmail and the Google Calendar. So when I ask something like, hey, Google, is my flight on time? Because I've given it permission to access my calendar, it already knows that. It doesn't have to be like, what airline, what flight number, what are you talking about? Or if I say, when is my next appointment? It knows that because I gave it permission to see my Google Calendar. So having that ecosystem allows for that type of personalization, which is nice.
It's great. So you're saying that it works great because it plugs in with the rest of Google's, like your Gmail, your calendar, and all of the activity that you're already like experiencing.
Yeah,
For
if you
those
choose.
asking questions, we will do our best to get to your question, but please ask on slido.com/voice UX. It's easier for me to manage it and also prioritize what people want to learn about. So please ask all questions. The reason that sometimes I might look to the chat room because I want to keep updated, but we're trying to keep everything fair and equal here. Okay, so what is the difference between a chatbot and a voice assistant, and how should we choose between the two?
This is another thing where I think that there's not really an industry standard. I'll tell you my personal opinion is that a voice assistant is just a form of chatbot. To me, they're all conversational systems, and they may be via voice, they may be via text, they may even be a combination of texting and swiping and voice all together. But I think generally there's a lot of perception that a chatbot means like a texting and button pushing thing where there's no voice. So I guess the way I'll address that question is to say not so much like chatbot versus voice assistant, but voice only versus voice forward versus like voice as one part of the modality. And so a few things to think about. If you're in a situation on a mobile phone where you're mostly tapping and typing, you want to think about the way a prompt is said out loud is not necessarily going to be identical to the way it's displayed on the screen, especially if you're speaking out loud and putting, like a display prompt underneath. You don't want to have the exact same spoken prompt as what is written because it's redundant and sort of distracting. Oftentimes, the display prompt is a shortened version or a summary of what's being spoken out loud. But I think one thing to really think about with this more visual mode or typing mode is you can do things that are hard for a voice-only system, like a list of 10 items, very, very challenging to do in a voice-only space, but you can easily do it visually. You can have things like suggestion chips to help people know what it is they can say. So you can take advantage of some of those visual modalities to move the conversation along. So I think the main message I like to give people is that, let's say you're building a Google action. You do have to think about all surfaces, all devices, because you build an action. I could use it on my smartwatch. I could use it on my Google Home, on my phone. We suggest you start with the most constrained case first, which is the voice only, the Google Home, because again, you have a very limited channel, just the audio channel, to give all your information. So build first for that. Then think about something like, okay, now I want to use it on my mobile phone. Great. Where do visuals enhance the conversation? Where does it make sense to show a picture or video or suggestion chips or cards, and add those to the conversation because you have that ability to have a richer experience in that case. So I hope that addressed the question, but if not, if you have a follow-on, please.
We have a few questions about career advice for voice user interface, like to become a conversation UX designer and such. But before we go to those questions, I just wanted to make a quick advertisement. So give it one quick second, please. Hold on. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Hey. Boop, boop, ba, do, do, do. Anyway, I just wanted to tell everybody about our CloudApp for Chrome. We have a new plugin for Chrome, and basically you can record a full page screenshot, record your screen, turn it into a GIF or a video. You can get started with getcloudapp.com/cascadesf, but we also have the Chrome plugin available at getcloudapp.com/downloads/Chrome. I'll send you guys all this information later, but it's an exceptional tool. I use it like 10 to 20 times a day to record my screen and to share quick videos or quick GIFs or even screenshots, annotations, and thank you for listening. Now back to our featured presentation. We'll talk a little bit about so Cathy, welcome back. Thank you for that. Thank you for holding on. Let's talk about career development. I know we mentioned it in the beginning, but let's talk about like a junior designer. What is the best career path for them to take from, say that somebody's a junior UX designer and they want to go into voice UX? What is the market like, and how can they expand their portfolio to go into that field of voice user interfaces?
I think in general, the market is pretty good. I think a lot of companies are either developing their own chatbot or their own voice assistant, however they want to call it. Or there's a lot of companies building actions and things for these smart speakers. And there's a shortage really of conversation designers. And of course, companies want to hire senior people, but you can't. It's really important to hire junior designers. When I started out in this field, obviously I was a complete novice. I had to learn. So in my mind, the best path forward is to build a portfolio where you show your thought process, where you have developed some prototypes for these conversational systems. And again, you might look at something that exists in the real world and critique it and say, here are some ways that it could be improved. And you could write up, specifically, why did you, decide that this prompt was confusing or misleading to the user? Or what could you do differently? You could even record dialogues between yourself and another person where you're just reading them out loud and you're showing, maybe you could even iterate. You could say, I had a use case, I wanted to try it, so I wrote some sample dialogues, I found some problems, I wrote some more sample dialogues. I think when I'm looking at resumes and things, I'm looking for or portfolios, I'm looking for someone to show me, how do they come to these conclusions? And I'd recommend there's a great book called How We Talk by N.J. Enfield, I believe, where it's a very accessible read about the way that humans converse and how you might apply. And then what you can do is you can take principles from that book and say, this is how I applied it to building a conversation. There's tons of podcasts out there where people are talking about voice user interfaces. There's online talks. And so really, I encourage you just to devour the things that are out there and then iterate on your own with coming up with interesting ideas for these things that you could share in a portfolio format or something like that.
So when you say share in a portfolio format, do you want to see the user flows as well? And what kind of software? I know I'm not sure if you're allowed to share different. Is that a limitation that you have? You can't share software, or what kind of software can designers use to quickly prototype voice user interfaces?
I think, again, with like the sample dialogues, you can use any text-based thing. You can, sure, put it in Google Doc, but you don't have to put it in Google Doc. You can put it in any text-based things. For your flows, you could use any flow charting. Certainly there is like the Google charting, but you can use any flow chart. It doesn't have to be Google products at all. There's a lot of products out there that help you develop flows. Some of them are free, some of them are more expensive. But we don't, I don't really care which software you use to create your sample dialogues or your flows, or how you recorded yourself doing a table read with a sample dialogue, or if you used a third party to do some prototyping. Great. Any way you want to explain your thought process is useful.
And how much experience does one usually have before they can get a job as a voice user interface designer at somewhere like Google?
It just depends. It depends on where we are with hiring. Sometimes we're hiring junior people. Sometimes we're hiring more senior people. So it depends. I would say, I've been at other companies, at other startups, and sometimes if you have been a UX writer or you've been a UX designer, that's enough to get a job starting to write for, as a junior designer, writing for a chatbot for a company. So it depends on the company.
Okay. And yeah, overflow is one. Well, that's what we consider to be a third party. A third party, I'm guessing a third party is anything other than Google, right?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
how I mean it. Yeah.
Okay. And what about the best voice prototyping tools for non-programmers? Is that the same thing, like the text-based editors, the wire, the sorry, the
The flows.
wireframing flow diagram tools?
Yeah.
Would that be the same thing?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of free tools out there. You can just look up, diagramming flow software, and you can find things.
Okay.
And wow, we have a lot of questions. A lot of questions. Some people are asking about internships for 2019, and what do you expect to see from the applicant's portfolio? I think you just answered that. You just want, maybe you can just real quickly, just so we have it crossed off the
Yeah,
list.
basically, I want to know how you think about conversational systems. So if you were to show either a design that you came up with, or whether you were to critique an existing design, don't just say like, well, that's a bad prompt. Why? What's going to happen? Do you have anything to connect it to, like with best practices or a theory about, why is that going to be a confusing experience for the users? Because that shows me like, oh, you're thinking about not just like, I'm not just saying, oh, that's bad. You're saying the reason this is confusing to the user is because it doesn't use the end focus principle or whatever it is. And so we can see that, oh, they know some stuff about Grice's maxims, the cooperative principle, these types of things that help us when we design, to show a little bit of understanding of some of those theories and things.
And how technical are normal like voice user interface designers compared to just a regular, like a UX designer and a programmer?
I think it's the same. Again, we have a wide range. I have a background in computer science, but a lot of people on the design team don't. They have linguistics, psychology, music. It really depends. So you definitely don't have to have a technical background. Some people do. It's more that you have a bit of understanding for the technology. You don't have to be a programmer, but you have to understand that, we can't just let the user say anything they want because the technology can't yet handle a completely open, say anything you want kind of situation. So a little bit of understanding is very important, but you don't have to be a computer scientist or a programmer.
Yeah, one of the things I found fascinating was Lindsay from Adobe XD. She's a research lead at Adobe XD, and she actually has a background in anthropology and ethnography, and she studies people, and it helps her understand how designers work. And then it's like also for like conversation. I love that you recommended this book, How We Talk. Are there any other conversation books about it feels like it would enhance our everyday conversation. You get better at listening, right?
Seriously. Yeah. I would also recommend, there's a classic called Wired for Speech by Cliff Nass. He was a Stanford professor. That's great. It's a little older, but it's still got some great stuff in it. Also, this isn't a book, but I mentioned just now the cooperative principle, which is by someone named Paul Grice. He came up with this in the 1970s. You can read up about that online. He talks about the four maxims of good conversations. Again, this wasn't talking about computers, this is talking about humans, but we use those to build good computer conversations. So that's another thing you can investigate.
A lot of it is just basic conversation and studying how humans interact with each other and then applying a system thinking to that.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So I've known like screenwriters who are wonderful screenwriters, but they can't make the leap because they can't quite get to the like, here's everything I can write and here's how this won't work or that won't work. So it's that combination where it's like you can understand this dynamic between humans, but you also know the constraints. And that to me is the best pairing of a skilled conversation designer.
Okay, and we still have some more time. Woohoo! We are really picking your brains. We're like sucking it up with a vacuum and taking everything. No,
leave me a little bit so I can do my job.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. No, okay. So I do have a question more about which somebody brought up earlier, and I thought it was a fantastic question. It's about systems, design systems. Like, how do you apply the same, like design systems where you have like recognizable patterns that you apply to multiple different interfaces and devices? How do you create voice user interface systems?
If I understand the question correctly, are you asking something like, are there patterns in conversational design that you are not just custom to one thing you build, but you can apply to both multiple features and multiple surfaces? Is that the
Yes.
question?
Yes. I think so. Yeah. Yes.
I'll start with that if somebody wants to ask me a clarification. But yeah, no, it's really, and again, if I think you put it in the chat, our link to the actions.google.com/design, we get into this thing called patterns, where we're talking about like, there are consistent types of interactions that you will have with an assistant, but different domains. So for example, there's something called browse and refine, which means maybe I'm looking for a hotel or something like that, where I've got a bunch of information and I have to narrow it down to the thing I want. So there are particular patterns that we would recommend for helping a user easily go through that type of information exchange. We have simpler patterns like confirmations. If I ask you, show me video of cute kittens, we'll say something like, sure, cute kittens. We call that an implicit confirmation. It's saying, I heard you, and you can tell that I heard you correctly. Because again, sometimes we get things wrong. So if I said, sure, here's a cute video of cute mittens, you would know right off the bat, oh, it didn't get it right. I need to do this again. And so we have those types of conversational patterns that apply regardless of the domain and even regardless of the surface you're on. And we discuss some of those on that Conversational Design Best Practices website.
Okay. And what about personas? How did you go, like Joanne Gia asked a question, how do you go about designing personas for voice user interfaces when you were at Voilo, Nuance, and Google?
Yeah. So, and I also just to clarify, I know that the word persona is a loaded term because in the research community, usually it refers to the user persona, who is your user, which we think a lot about. But in the voice world, we also use persona like the brand persona or the system persona. So what we do is we want to think about, again, like who is your user? What is their context? What are they trying to do? And what kind of persona will best fit those needs? And when we think about the system persona, we're thinking about, what are the qualities that will help them give the information in the best way possible for the user. We don't want to go crazy with our persona definition. We're not writing like some 10-page dossier of who they are, but we want to know like, what are their main characteristics? And specifically, what are the types of phrases they might say? What are the type of phrases they might not say? If you have like a casual pizza ordering thing, you might have it say things like, cool, get your order. But if you're doing like is my bus on time? You're not gonna be like, cool, bus is on time, probably. Because it's like, they just want to get to work. They don't care. They don't want some like casual fun persona. They just want to, they're in the business mode. So you want to think about what is happening with your user, what type of brand or system persona will meet those users' needs. So it depends on the use case.
Great answer. And what about, this is something that's kind of interesting to myself, I do a lot of interviews on, and we record dialogue and sometimes I'll get a transcription that's auto-transcribed on YouTube or whatever. And it's really funny because sometimes somebody's from Brazil or somebody's from India, and the way they pronounce a word will show up completely different. Mm-hmm. How do you go about designing voice user interfaces for multicultural experiences?
Yeah, that's really important. It's not easy. So I'll say a couple things. So of course, there's like the part about the speech recognition, like you mentioned. If we are speaking in English, but one of us has an accent, the recognition engine might not get the words correctly every time. And we will be improving this by being able to, for example, detect that, oh, this person maybe is from England and their accent is different. And we want to make sure that we use that language model when we're listening so that we can understand everybody. So there's the listening part and making sure we understand the words someone is saying. And it is tricky, but we're getting better at that. And the other aspect is more like maybe something cultural. Maybe we understood the words you said, but we didn't understand their meaning. And when we go translate something from our English to another location, the localization process is not just about the literal word by word translation. It has to be like, think about something like a joke, right? If I ask my Google Assistant to tell me a joke, is that joke going to be funny in another country? Well, we should think about that. It's also just to do with flow. One example I love to give is when we're doing address collection in the US and I say, what's your address? You're probably going to start with a street. You're going to say 100 Main Street. If I'm in England, you're probably going to start with your postcode. And so that's the same language, right? But the flow is different. So it is really important to localize, not just for the literal words, but to think about what's happening in that location that might be a little bit different. And it's not an easy problem. It's very resource intensive. You have to have a lot of people working on it, but it's really important.
And how do you check for biases and also like think about like gender or language accents, and do you have any guidance or any advice on checking for biases?
I mean, one thing that's really important is, of course, your data set, because does your data set have bias? And one thing, if you think about speech in particular, when the very first speech recognition engines were built, they understood, white male voices the best because that was the data that was collected to build the models. And so we have to make sure that we're collecting data from a wide representative sample of people and not just focusing on one particular type of person, because that will bias the data. And we need to make sure we're understanding lots of different people, obviously the genders. One thing I like about the Google Assistant is that, we have, I think, 8 voices that you can choose from for your assistant. And when you are a brand new user setting up your Google Home for the first time in the US, it will 50-50 pick the male sounding voice or the female sounding voice. So we're trying to figure out ways, to make this less biased.
I do have a question about about gender and how it plays into voice user interfaces. But before that, do you see a lot of jobs available for bilingual conversational designers and bilingual UX researchers?
I think so. I mean, I don't hire for that, so I can't say for sure. But I feel like I said, with this localization effort that's happening, there is a need for people to have this skill set as we go, as companies that build these things go to these different countries. We need people who are familiar with that. So I would think so, but I guess I'm not familiar with those job openings necessarily. But to me, it seems like a very important skill set.
Awesome. And I read one of your tweets, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and you talk about the need for having, all voices, like female, male. Is there a reason that most of the chatbots, or well, I'll say the conversational design systems, are set on female voices?
I'm sure there is. I'm sure there is. Certainly, a lot of articles I read have talked about the fact that maybe it's because we think of female voices as friendlier and more helpful and caring, and so we have this idea that an assistant would also be that way. Obviously, I don't want to perpetuate that. And I'm a big believer, if you're a designer, that it's not just our job to go along with stereotypes, but it's our job to really understand them and realize that maybe we need to make changes so that they're not true stereotypes anymore, because really there's no reason that an assistant should be female or male per se. That shouldn't be a built-in conception. Even if somebody did a study that said, oh, people just prefer the female voice. Well, why? What's really the reason behind that? And do we need to use that when we're building what we're building?
In the future, they're gonna have like, no, the tone that you like the best, and they're like, you'll customize the tone to your preference. That's a great idea. Take it for later. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, I think this is a really neat question. It's more about shopping. How can voice user interfaces integrate into the shopping experience, especially from the point of view of enhancing accessibility for people who might be blind?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of potential there for that population for sure, because wouldn't it be nice to be able to do your browsing voice only in that situation? I think so. It's interesting. So voice shopping certainly has not taken off as a thing at this point, but I think there's a few things around that. One thing is, I think there's use cases like reordering. So when I use voice shopping, which isn't very often, it's because I want to reorder something I've already ordered, like paper towels. I don't need to see a picture of paper towels to order paper towels. And that's something you can do, right now with things like the assistant. But you might imagine a world in the future where people don't necessarily complete their purchase via voice, but they start the process. Maybe they get engaged with a brand and they I don't know, have a fun game with that brand that gets them excited about the brand, or they learn some information. Like maybe someone's like telling the story about the shoes they bought and how cool they were and blah, blah, blah. And that gets you excited. And then maybe in the end, you go to your laptop or your phone and you complete the purchase. So I don't think it has to be that, oh, voice shopping has to be end to end every time to be successful. It could be a gateway into shopping for other things. But back to that the first point about someone maybe who's visually impaired. Yeah, I mean, when we have a shopping experience on the assistant, and you can do end-to-end, I think, where you can browse for the things you want and put it in your cart and all that. And it's tricky. If you're behind to buy a shirt, how do you describe a shirt, with voice only? That's a really difficult problem. But I like the idea of creating a world in which somebody who is visually impaired could still complete their whole purchase without just through voice.
I think that's really interesting. Or like they're visiting a malware site and they're like, no, like the bad, it's like these like vocal alerts, like, don't go there. I like to do voices.
But yeah, audio is a really important channel that we can communicate with. You can back to the, learning about how humans communicate. I always forget what the statistic is. It's like something like Deborah Tannen says like 60 or 70% of what we communicate is not through the words themselves. It's the tone of our voice. It's our eye gaze. It's their body language. All these things are such a key component of how we communicate.
I love this. And by the way, all of your questions, everybody who participated in this Ask a Designer, I am so inspired by everybody. It's amazing. Like the kind of questions that we're getting, and your answers, Cathy, are brilliant. We still have a little bit more time, so a few more. We're going to go a little bit into machine learning and how does machine learning and artificial intelligence play a part into conversational UI?
Well, certainly right up front in the speech recognition itself, that is understanding the individual words that somebody says. And I should make a quick explanation here for people who aren't familiar. So if you think about what happens when I speak, like when I say, what's the weather, and ultimately it responding. So the first thing it has to do is figure out the words themselves that I spoke. But that doesn't necessarily give you any meaning. So you can imagine, like, I don't speak German. If I'm listening to someone speak German, maybe I could write down basically the words they're saying, but still have no idea what they meant. So part two, of course, is the natural language understanding, figuring out the intent. What did the user want to happen? Why did they say this thing? And so on part one, speech recognition, we're getting really, 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 really good at that. Really good. Not perfect, but really good. And so much of that is due to, deep learning and really understanding, being able to take in all that speech data and really figure it out. On the natural language understanding, that's a little behind. And certainly machine learning is being applied to that. But a lot of systems today have a lot of manual, human created work to do a lot of that intent extraction, but machine learning is being applied to that and will become a bigger part.
And how about with like VR and AR? Do you see voice user interfaces integrating into VR and AR and we call it XR, really? But.
Totally. I mean, you're thinking about you're in a VR situation. Let's say you're playing a driving game or something. Again, you want to be hands free, right? You want to just be able to speak your commands. I'm not that familiar with VR, but a few times that I've used it, the controls I've found very awkward to like select stuff and things like that. It would be so much easier via voice. And with AR, same thing. It's like if I'm looking at, like, I've got an AR display on the wall in front of me, I want to be able to say, like, okay, I want to point and say, like, that one or the one in the top corner. I want to use a combination probably of my voice and my gestures to do that. And voice will play a key part of that.
Okay, and I'm going to use this next 10 minutes, which is, this is by far the best video webinar I've seen on conversation design. Thank you. Thank you, but we're not finished, so you still got more, but thank you, Melanie. We're still going, woohoo. But by the way, the reason this is so great is because of the interaction of the audience asking questions, which is you guys, and Cathy's brilliant brain, and me just like sitting here listening and funneling everything. But it's awesome. Cathy, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what Google offers. How does Google make it easy for you to create a conversation design?
So I would say to that end, part of it is the Design Principles website that I mentioned, where we're really interested in sharing out best practices. We're not trying to like say these are ours by any means. We want everyone in the community to understand those best practices. A couple other things, we do offer workshops sometimes, conversation design workshops where we lead groups through a very hands-on sprint of creating conversations. And then as far as like getting into the actual development, then our tool Dialogflow, we even have on Dialogflow something called templates, which allows someone who doesn't program to do certain sort of predetermined flows, but with your own content, and actually deploy them on like a Google Home or whatever. So using, and the other thing about that is there's a great community around Dialogflow and actions on Google where you can go to local events and learn from people on how to build them and get a lot of help. And sometimes, us Googlers show up at those events as well to help out, but a lot of great people out there in the community who are really passionate about actions on Google and building these experiences who are very enthusiastic and like to help. We appreciate you, all the people out there who do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. And we talked to, okay, what do you think the future of voice user interfaces are? What's in the future? What's in the near future versus the long term?
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and I always preface it by saying this is Cathy Pearl's view. This is not Google's view. So don't say like, oh, Google said. Personally, I think a few things will happen. I think we'll do more about the sort of customization where, like I was talking about, is my flight on time? More of that kind of stuff where it knows if I give it permission, it would know my habits and know like in the morning, obviously I want my commute, or in the evening, I'm feeling a little more chatty. Maybe we should have a little back and forth, or maybe I'm stressed out and you're going to play my favorite playlist or something like that. So I can imagine a world where that type of stuff happens. Also, it's going to become ubiquitous in the sense that you'll be able to access the assistant or not, I shouldn't say that, not the assistant, an assistant, an experience in a lot of different places if you would want to. Other things I'm really excited about, the sub-vocalization technology. Some of you, if you haven't heard of it, look up something called Alter Ego from MIT Media Labs. Right now it's just a prototype. Other companies are also working on this, but basically it's a little thing you can wear that reads the bone conduction when you're speaking, so you can speak without making sound. Because one of the things we have is if you're using a voice assistant, we often don't want to be talking out loud, whether that's because I'm in a shared office space and it's just annoying to other people, or whether it's private and I'm on the train and I don't want to talk about my colonoscopy on the train or whatever. So there's voice can be very convenient, but I don't always want people to hear. So this type of technology will allow us to communicate in that speedy way without everybody else hearing it. I also think this is going to be more tactile. There's a great thing called the Huggy robot from the Max Planck Institute, I think it is, where they had a big old robot and it would say, "Can I have a hug?" And people would come up and hug it and it would hug you back. I think we're going to have more tactile experiences with these assistants because humans like to be tactile, right? We like to pet our pets and be affectionate and things like that. So I can imagine a world where that comes into play as well.
Can I have a hog?
That's
really funny. That's so funny. I know we did talk about multilingual and then the market. What about, how do you get people to speak clearer? Like maybe you have a toddler who's like, Alexa, play this. Like how does it work?
It's regular cognitive behavioral technique where if the kid doesn't get understood, the kid will keep going until they are understood. So one thing I want to say is that sometimes people will say, well, how do I get my users to speak more clearly? And I say that's not what you want. And talking about just generally the general adult population, because the data is really built on the way we actually talk. So people sometimes start talking more loudly or they're more enunciating, and that's not necessarily easier to understand. But for non-standard speech patterns, like a toddler, or maybe somebody who has a condition where maybe they had a stroke and their speech is a little bit different. I'm excited because there's some companies out there who are starting to work on this non-standard speech recognition where maybe they could train it to a particular demographic, like 2-year-olds or people who have suffered a certain type of stroke or something like that. Because again, it's important to be able to understand lots of different people. I think also about people, or my aunt is deaf and her speech is non-standard. It won't recognize her, but there are companies and people thinking about how we can be more inclusive so that other types of speech can be included. One other thing I'll say about children's speech, it's not just like the way they're forming the words, but it's their speech patterns. So they stop and start, they interrupt themselves. And so that's also a little bit more of a challenge.
Great. Okay, and then we have time for one or two more questions. We talked about personas, but what about personality? What are some tips you have for creating a personality for a voice agent?
So to me, when I use the word persona, it's the same thing as I would describe talking about the system or brand personality. That is, you're talking about the characteristics of the system. And because right now, how does the system's personality display itself? Well, if it's in a voice only situation, it's the words and the tone. Well, mostly the words. If it's a visual addition as well, what are the visual pieces that also enhance it? But if you're thinking mainly about the voice and the words, those are where the personality characteristics are going to come in. Again, is it going to be somebody who's more formal, more casual? What types of phrasing will they use? That's part of the personality / persona when you're designing for that.
Fantastic. And my final question of the day is, okay, so when I use a lot of voice to text, and sometimes I'll have to say, "Hi, Cathy, period. What do you think about this? Question mark. New paragraph, new line." Like, do you see a solution for that in the future?
Actually, sorry, before I answer that question, one other resource about persona design is I'll recommend a book called Voice User Interface Design, which is co-written by James Jangola, Mike Cohen, and Jennifer Baylog. That has a whole lot of stuff about persona and personality. So back to your question about when you're dictating, you've got to use punctuation and stuff like that. I think that will change. I think it's been kind of a low priority because in terms of extracting meaning, if you're talking to a voice assistant, we don't really care necessarily where the period is or whether it was an exclamation point or a period. So I think it's been a lower priority. But now that people are using it to text each other and stuff like that, it makes sense to try and work on that again. So I suspect, and again, this is not a comment about Google or anything, but I suspect that that will become something that becomes a solved problem.
I hope so, because my mom texts me like a paragraph and it has no spaces at all.
Yes.
And I love it, but and I'm glad that she can actually text now. So that it makes it.
Well, and tone is difficult. I mean, how do I know that you've put a period versus an exclamation point at the end of your sentence? Because of your intonation, and intonation recognition is tricky.
Yeah, especially when you're excited all the time and everything is so great. Oh
Yeah,
my
you have to
gosh.
calibrate it to your voice.
Yeah.
Like, this is an exclamation point, but this is not.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Cathy. Thank everybody. Give it up for Cathy. Now it's where you can all add in your claps at the chat. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm using my chat bar. There we go. Yeah. Woohoo. Thank you so much. Okay. So real quickly, for those who missed our beginning, who want to hang on for a second, here I wanted to just quickly go into our CloudApp. So you can try CloudApp, get cloudapp.com/cascadesf, and I will hook you up with free 90 days pro trial for no cost at all. Go to getcloudapp.com/cascadesf, and you can use CloudApp to record your screen, turn it into a GIF or a video, share bugs and share files fast. Also add voice annotations and record your voice and record your screen to explain a prototype. It's very handy. I use it all the time, probably like all throughout the day, like 10 to 12 times a day. And that is why I joined CloudUp. So thank you, Cathy Pearl. And also one more thing really quickly to let everybody know, if you live in the Bay Area, I would like to share with you our upcoming mentor night. So for Cascade SF, I throw these mentor nights. It's a holiday mentor night. You can get tickets at holidaymentor.eventbrite.com. And basically, it's a holiday party, and you meet one-on-one with the mentor for 20-minute sessions. Each mentor night, depending on the amount of mentors we have, but if we have 30 mentors who show up, which is common, we'll have 180 mentoring sessions in 2 hours. And that's incredible. And It's not expensive. Right now we have early bird tickets for the next couple of days till they sell out at $15. Extra early bird, 15, early bird 20, and then regulars 25. Our mentors include designers from TaskRabbit, LinkedIn, lead UX designers from Stitch Fix. We have all kinds of designers. It's an excellent, excellent opportunity. User researchers, if you want to speak with a voice UX designer or you want to speak with a user researcher, you can email me andi@getcloudapp.com, and I will actually reach out to my network and try to find somebody to help you answer whatever question you might have. And that is at Holiday Mentor Night, holidaymentor.eventbrite.com. I hope to see you there. And don't forget to check out CloudApp at getcloudapp.com, Cascade SF. Thank you so much, Cathy. And have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks for all the great questions, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, bye-bye. Hanging up.